Hey guys, what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace, either in rest or in recovery. With that out of the way, happy True Crime Thursday. Welcome back to my channel, or just welcome if you've never been here before. Today we're going to be looking into an unsolved disappearance case, which usually I kind of hate because I'm the kind of person who needs to know everything. I need to know the answers. I need the closure. I don't want to be left with unanswered questions. But I feel like this is a very interesting case and I don't know a lot of people who have heard about it, so I just wanted to share it. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Let's get into it. Today we're looking into the disappearance and murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy was born on the 23rd of April 1948 and she lived in Stanton, California with her 4-year-old son and her aunt. She had a really close relationship with her family, especially her parents. She had a really good bond with her parents and they would often babysit her son for her while she was at work, which was super helpful for her. And she was raised Christian, so her family was Christian. She was a devout Christian and she took it really seriously. She never touched alcohol, she never touched drugs, at least that's what she and her friends and family maintain and always have. That being said, she worked in Anaheim, California at these 2 jointly owned stores and she worked as a secretary. But the funny thing is that these stores were the kind of stores that sell like weed or pot paraphernalia. So it was like a bong shop, like a hippie bong shop with like grinders and whatever. And then the other store next door was full of dream catchers and healing crystals and beads and that kind of stuff. So she worked as a secretary for both of these shops, which I just find really funny considering she's working somewhere that sells paraphernalia that she is like religiously against. I just think that's funny. And her co-workers kind of felt like she didn't really fit in either. They didn't dislike her or anything. She was a really hardworking girl. They could all admit that. And she was also really kind, really friendly, really nice, really polite. She was really good to customers and the co-workers. So no one had a problem with her. They felt like she didn't really fit the vibe. She wasn't really on the same like wavelength as the rest of the co-workers were, because they obviously had very different interests and very different hobbies, because she didn't smoke drugs and they did. So it was a little bit weird. Outside of work, Dorothy didn't have a whole lot of friends. She didn't lead a very exceptionally social life. She was quite happy to be a homebody. She was quite happy to stay with her son and spend most of her time with her son or her family or her parents. And she was really quite happy living that life. She was happy with the people who were in her life. Dating also wasn't like a huge deal to her. It wasn't a huge priority to her. She had gone on dates once or twice here and there, like whatever. But as far as her family could tell, it wasn't a priority to her. And as far as her family could tell, in the recent years, she had never had a serious boyfriend. That's why it was really shocking when Dorothy started getting some really weird calls from this guy. The first of many calls came from this anonymous guy who basically confessed his love for her, said how beautiful she was, showered her with compliments and just absolutely loved her, adored her. And this obviously made her feel quite uncomfortable because she asked who it was and he wouldn't tell her and she couldn't recognize the voice. So, that kind of put her on edge, but it was just sort of uncomfortable. She didn't feel in danger because this guy loved her, apparently. As time went on though, these calls, they started getting a lot more frequent and he would never stay on the line for very long. He would be very quick, but now he was sort of switching up. He would sometimes call and be in love and full of joy and just shower her with compliments, and then other times he would call up and he'd be full of anger. And all he would do is give her threats and threats of violence. It started to get really sort of alarming when he started letting off all this information about her personal life, about where she lived, about where she worked, about the things that she did, about her son, that no stranger should know. And then she started receiving these phone calls not only at home but at work, so she couldn't even escape it and everybody knew about them. One time he called her and she was at home, she was with her mum, and he said, "Come outside, I've got something for you." So her and her mum, they immediately run outside, hoping to just sort of catch a glimpse of him, assuming he is out there. I don't know whether they felt necessarily threatened at this point, but I think it was a spur of the moment, like, oh my God, he's there, we need to see who it is. So they run outside. He wasn't there, nobody was there, but sitting on top of Dorothy's car windshield was one dead rose, like these. So this really sort of freaked her out because he hadn't sort of done stuff like this before. He'd only ever called, but this meant that he had shown up not only to her house, but like obviously knew the car and then had the audacity to call and say, "Go look." And chances are he was probably somewhere around watching that, because otherwise he wouldn't have got as much of like a kick out of it. And she didn't really know what the message behind the rose was supposed to mean, but she had a couple of guesses, especially for the fact that it was a dead rose. This anonymous man would call her up, and not only would he say, "Hey, I want to kill you," but he said, "I will kill you. I will kill you. It's gonna happen. I'm going to kill you." And he would explain how he was gonna kill her. On one phone call, he told her how he was going to cut her up into tiny little pieces so that no one would ever find her and he would get away with it. And at this point, she was terrified. At this point, Dorothy didn't really know what to do. She felt really frightened. She couldn't really sleep. She was having a really bad time because of this anonymous man who just kept popping up everywhere. This was something that ran through her mind a lot at this point. Like, it's something you don't really get off your mind when it's happening, while you're in the middle of it. And she was considering buying a handgun in order to feel a little bit more protected, like she could protect herself. And she sort of tossed and turned on the decision to buy a handgun, and ultimately she decided against it. She sort of talked herself out of it, sort of convinced herself like, oh, it's probably not that deep. I probably don't need a gun. Like, that's very dangerous. Would I even know how to use it? She sort of convinced herself that it was unnecessary, and maybe she was just overreacting a little bit. She did, however, start taking karate classes. She wanted to learn a little bit of self-defense so that she felt a little bit more confident being alone, that she could maybe defend herself and, you know, fend off some anonymous caller. That being said, she only signed up for the karate class 1 week before she disappeared. On the 20th of May 1980, Dorothy's work was holding a team employee meeting at 9 p.m. at one of the stores. So she arrives, and her co-worker Pam, they sort of notice that another co-worker called Conrad, he's having a little bit of a hard time. He looks like he's in a lot of pain. He's feeling really sick, like he's not okay. So between the three of them and, you know, collectively, I guess the whole team, they decide he needs to go to hospital. So Dorothy, being the sweet, kind person that she is, she offered to drive him. So Pam helps him get into the car, and Pam, Conrad, and Dorothy drive to the hospital. So both Dorothy and Pam, they wait in the waiting room until, you know, Conrad's all right, and he gets released at about 11 p.m. and he had been bitten by a spider. So they've given him like a prescription to go get the medicine. He's still feeling sick. He's still not really like great. So Dorothy, again being the nice person she is, she offers to go and get the car and bring it around to the front so that they can just easily exit, get in the car and go, so that he doesn't have to walk very far. So he gratefully accepts, and because he's still not really okay, he can't get his prescription himself. So Pam takes him to go and get the prescription. So while Pam's taking him to go and get the prescription, Dorothy wanders out to go get the car. Once they finish getting the prescription, they go and wait out the front, waiting for Dorothy to come back and get them. And they see her car coming, but it's going way too fast. Like, she's speeding down this driveway, and they don't understand what's going on. So they start waving, they start yelling, and she drives straight past them. And at first they're a bit worried, and they're like, what the hell was that? Why did she just do that? But eventually they sort of convince themselves, similar to how she did with the gun, that, you know, being over dramatic. They were like, oh, we're probably being dramatic. She must have had an emergency with her son. They knew how much she adored her son. Couple hours go by and they still haven't heard from Dorothy, and now they're a little bit concerned because they feel like if it had have been something with her son, she would have let them know. She's that kind of person. She's kind and she's caring and she's not going to leave him hanging. You know what I mean? She would have called and made sure that they were okay as well. But she didn't. They hadn't heard from her. So they called the police and they report her missing. The next day at 4 a.m. in the morning, Dorothy's car was found burning in an alleyway 10 miles away from the hospital. So the police are called, they identify the car, they check it out, and they don't find anything. There's no sort of information from the car, there's no clues, there's no leads, nothing. At this point, the police aren't really sure what to do, because when the car drove past Dorothy's co-workers, they said that the lights were so blinding, they couldn't see who was driving. So nobody even knows if she's been taken at this point. All they know is that she's driven off and hasn't come back. And so the police are like, well, there's a good chance she just left because she wanted to leave. She just ran away. Maybe she didn't like what she was doing. You know, whatever reason someone has to leave, they considered that. And then when they saw the car burning, they considered maybe there's more to the story. Maybe something did happen, but there's no clue here. So they had no idea what direction to take the investigation because they were really going off nothing. You would think that at this point, maybe those anonymous phone calls would stop because Dorothy's no longer there and obviously they're all interested in her disappearance. But actually, the phone calls get more frequent, this time calling Dorothy's mum. He would call Dorothy's mum and he'd claim the kidnapping. He would say, I have Dorothy, this is what I've done, this is how I did it. And he kept his phone calls very, very short. Obviously, Dorothy's parents, they contacted the police and they were like, oh my God, we're getting these phone calls, you need to trace them. But every time that he called, he would keep it under a certain amount of seconds so that the phone calls couldn't be traced. So they have this man admitting, I've got your daughter, I've taken her, I stole her right from under you. But they can't get his location, they can't pick up who he is, they don't know his voice, they don't know anything. He's admitting to it and yet they have nothing. And by now we can tell that this man was obviously stalking Dorothy. But now, as it turns out, it sort of seems like he's stalking Dorothy's mum as well, because it becomes a frequent, regular thing that every single Wednesday afternoon when Dorothy's mum is home alone, she will get a phone call from this man. It's almost like he's out there watching or had been watching and knows she's going to be alone every Wednesday and knows that she will be more likely to be frightened when she's home alone by herself than when her husband's there. And he would tell Dorothy's mum how he's killed her and how he did it, the very vivid, detailed ways of how he's done it in each phone call. And then he sort of told her that he's an ex-lover of Dorothy's and they were really serious and he caught her cheating on him with another man and she should be punished for that. She shouldn't get away with that, and that's why he did what he did. That's why she's dead now. And Dorothy's parents didn't really believe this, for the fact that, as far as they knew, she didn't date. As far as they knew, she hadn't dated in quite some time. And, you know, the aunt that she lived with, the only place that she went was work or with her son. Like, it didn't really make sense. Eventually, these phone calls got to the point where the mum she couldn't take it anymore. She's being taunted by this man who has her daughter, taunted, being told how her daughter's been killed, brutally murdered. Like, she can't handle it anymore, so she tries to get a new phone, she tries to get a new number. They attempted to move, they did everything they could to try and like just get away from this man, this anonymous freaky man, but he just kept popping up everywhere. Every time she had a new phone or a new number or whatever, she would get another phone call. And you know how long this went on for? 4 years this man called her. 4 years, every Wednesday for 4 years. He called to tell her about her dead daughter that he murdered. How the fuck could a mother survive that? These calls were destroying her family. Her mum could not sleep. She was terrified. She didn't want to be alone. She dreaded Wednesdays because she knew she was going to get a phone call. She dreaded being home alone because she knew she was going to get a phone call. She didn't really want to leave the house anymore. She didn't feel safe anywhere, and either did the husband. Not only is the husband also mourning Dorothy just like the mum is, but he's now worried about the love of his life being tormented and stalked by the same person who killed his daughter. At least that's what they think at this point. 4 years go by. They can't sleep, they can't eat, they can't do anything. They feel so unsafe. They are just filled with like sorrow and mourning for their poor daughter. Like, it is brutal. And by now, Dorothy's son, he's 8 years old. And I don't know to what extent he knew about what was going on. I don't know whether they, you know, told him like your mum went missing, or whether they said she had passed away, or whether they said there was a stalker, or, you know, stranger danger, be careful. Like, I don't know the extent to which he knew. But being 8 years old, and for them to have to take him on and live in constant fear, the stress, like, how did they not have heart attacks? I don't know. In August 1984, they finally found something in Dorothy's case. Although at first they didn't actually realize it, a man came across 2 sets of bones, one belonging to a dog and one belonging to a human, and the bones were slightly charred. So the police originally assumed that the bones were from 2 years ago, where a fire had actually swept over the area in which the bones were found. But after they tested the dental records, they were able to actually identify the body as being Dorothy Scott's. With her body was a turquoise ring that she used to wear and her watch had actually been stopped just an hour after she had left that hospital, and it had stayed that way for 4 years. The police, with this new sort of evidence, they continued to look into the case, but again, they came up with absolutely nothing. They had nothing to go off, had no idea who this man was, and it was just, they were at a standstill. After the remains had sort of been announced on the news that they had been found, Dorothy's mum received one last phone call from the anonymous man after he realized that the remains had been found, and all he said to her is Dorothy home? That was the last that they ever heard from this anonymous man, with the exception of one news article written by an editor who claims they got a phone call from this anonymous man who said the same story, that he was an ex-lover and she had cheated on him, and that's why he did what he did. And he went into detail with this editor as well, and they ran an article. To this day, we still don't know who took Dorothy. We don't know who killed Dorothy. We don't know who the anonymous caller was. We don't even know if he was actually responsible for it, or whether he was just happy timing and got a kick out of it. Who knows? The only thing we do know is that he was an obsessive compulsive stalker, and that he ruined multiple lives that day. He ruined that entire family. He really, really broke them down. That is the disappearance of Dorothy Scott. Please let me know what you think about this one in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you would have done if you were in Dorothy's situation receiving these phone calls. How would you have felt? How would you have dealt with it? Obviously back then things sort of are different to now, but I'm just curious what you would have done. Also, let me know what you think about this story. Let me know in the comments down below, or you can head over to my Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, which is all linked in the description down below. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. I would really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my new videos. I post every single Thursday all about true crime, and I would love to have you be a part of it. Make sure you guys are being safe out there. Never help a co-worker. Just let them help themselves. They're fine. They'll make it. Never answer your phone. I don't, and I have no stalkers, so clearly that's the way to go. And most importantly, if you get a phone call from an anonymous caller with a creepy voice that tells you he has something for you outside, maybe don't go outside, just in case there's something he has. It's like a knife, you know, maybe just don't. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe. Bye.